We're here now at the point where we're about to activate our first panel discussion of the conference. Let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Our first panelist, Desi Andrades. Desi is a business partner group head at the Information Technology Department for the Inter-American Development Bank. She focuses on how to solve business problems with the proper application of technology through a human-centered designed approach. As only one of two women in the executive management team of the department, she is passionate in coaching and mentoring young women professionals in the technology sector, seeking to generate qualified pipeline of women leaders. Our next panelist, she is Sonali Diji. She is the Vice President, People for C&W Communications. She leads a team of experienced HR professionals who ensure that the people strategy aligns with our business objectives and the workforce supports the growth and ambitions of the company. She has 25 plus years of experience in HR roles in the telecommunications and technology industries. Joining our first two, we have Monika Daisy. Monika Daisy rounds off the panelists, and she is the global head of the Connectivity and Access Policy Group at Facebook. This is where she focuses on issues involving infrastructure, spectrum, accessibility, online communications, service providers, and net neutrality. Prior to joining Facebook, she spent over a decade in senior positions at the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, including service as Deputy Chief of the Wireless Bureau, where she focused on spectrum issues and infrastructure development. So these are our three panelists. We want to say a very special welcome to our panelists. Now, let me introduce our moderator. The moderator for this session, none other than Wendy Mcdonald. Wendy is the Senior Director of External Communications and Stakeholder Relations for C&W Communications, with responsibility for the Caribbean region. She provides strategic support in communication for business-critical initiatives, including development and guidance of implementation of communication plans related to key business lines and group initiatives, such as in-country brand launches and new products and services. So this is where I take my leave, and I hand over to the moderator, Wendy Mcdonald. Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Wendell. Good morning, all. It is my absolute honor not only to be here, but to also have three amazing women with me this morning to discuss women in the leadership space in ICT. Looking back at 2020 and the first half of 2021, it's clear that the COVID-19 pandemic not only had a huge impact on every single person the world over, whether directly or indirectly, but that its particular adverse socioeconomic effects were disproportionately felt by women. The pandemic served to intensify a number of challenges already being faced by women in the workplace. Forced to suddenly and unexpectedly manage, or perhaps more appropriately, juggle competing and overlapping work and family commitments on a scale and with a level of urgency many women had never before encountered. A large percentage of the workforce found themselves struggling just to stay afloat, while numerous others found themselves either being let go or forced to remove themselves from their jobs. All the progress we've seen over the past few years could be erased. The COVID-19 lockdowns, or in some instances shut-ins, have also seen a marked increase in the number of domestic violence cases and reports impacting not only, but mainly women. Well-being and mental health have become real challenges that require our attention more than ever. As we are well aware, women still hold far too few positions in leadership, government, and as heads of state. Of course, it isn't just about the numbers, but the statistics still remain shocking. In the US, 7% of women hold CEO positions in Fortune 500 companies, and only 28% of all SVPs are women. In Colombia, only 16% of women sit in leadership teams, and in Chile, 12% of CEOs are women. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a recent statistic for our region, but I think that we can all agree the numbers will be very low. We can also agree that this is a very important topic, particularly as we continue to live in a pandemic and must acknowledge that COVID-19 has had a greater impact on women. It is our hope that at the end of today's discussions, we would have reinforced the importance of hiring women, supporting and promoting women in the field, while exploring current obstacles and highlighting what some organizations are doing in support of changing the conversation to where we see a more gender-balanced industry. We will have our discussion, and then we will take questions at the end of the session. Please post your questions in the Q&A section. I'd like to begin with a recent IADB report entitled COVID-19, a Caribbean Crisis, based on an online survey conducted in 2020 with 6 countries: Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. The report discusses how COVID-19 has triggered a severe and unprecedented economic crisis, leading to job losses and business closures. What was very telling, though, is the fact that the employment shock was unequal across genders. In the Bahamas, 58.5% of women declared losing their jobs, compared to 39.1% of men. In Barbados, those numbers were 47.2% of women, compared to 38.1% of men. In Guyana, it was 44.8% women to 36.6% men. In Jamaica, 53.7% to 39.3%. In Trinidad and Tobago, 44.8% to 45.1%. Interestingly, however, in Suriname, the reverse appeared to be the case, with 28% of women to 28% of men to 23.5% of women losing their jobs. Daisy, this question is for you. This is very impactful information. Did we lose Daisy? I don't see her on the screen any longer. Okay. Okay, well, we will continue on. That's technology. Sometimes we have these issues, but I will now move over to Monika with us. Monika, a 2020 study on corporate America conducted by McKinsey & Company and leanin.org states that the events of 2020 have turned workplaces upside down. Under the highly challenging circumstances of COVID-19, many employees are struggling to do their jobs. Many feel like they're always on now that the boundaries between work and home have blurred. They're worried about their family's health and finances. Burnout is a real issue. The report states that women in particular have been negatively impacted. And there are 3 key points to note. Mothers are 3 times as likely as fathers to be responsible for their family's housework and childcare during COVID. Mothers are more than twice as likely as fathers to worry that their performance is being judged negatively due to their caregiving responsibilities. And 3 in 10 women have considered downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce because of COVID-19, and mothers are far more likely than fathers to think about taking these steps. There's a real risk of losing women in leadership and future women leaders, as well as unwinding years of painstaking progress towards gender diversity. So Monika, can you tell us, is there a way to empower women interested in ICT and tech during COVID? And also, can you share some initiatives by Facebook that have been used to help bridge the gender gap and provide resources for women?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for moderating this panel, and thank you to CANTO for inviting me to speak here. I really appreciate that. So just in terms of what Facebook has been doing during the pandemic, we've been the company has been in charge of developing a blueprint to help all employees get through the pandemic, and has been empowering employees to make decisions that help make the biggest impacts to our career. So I'm personally able to work flexibly, manage my own time, and be strategic and thoughtful about how to prioritize my work so that I can deliver the most impact. So some examples of this, when the pandemic first hit, Facebook gave a $1,000 bonus to every employee to help them amid the ongoing pandemic. And each of the company's nearly 45,000 employees received an exceeds rating for their first 6-month review of 2020, which led to bonuses that could be used to help further help employees during the pandemic. The company also introduced a new paid time off program that allowed employees to take up to a month away from work to care for sick relatives in light of the outbreak. And for shorter term needs, Facebook offered paid administrative leave, which gave employees 20 days of leave for caregiving that could be taken in one-day increments. And additionally, Facebook offered flexibility to its employees in terms of work schedules, allowing alternative working hours or going offline in time chunks that would help them manage their schedule, especially for people with children at home. But as a company, we're really we look at. You also asked about leadership and empowerment of women in the ICT field more generally, and we find that it's really closely tied to the role of young women and girls. We think about the future of digital transformation. As we think about that, we really want to emphasize the importance of youth and girls in addressing the digital gender gap. One way to empower young women in ICT and tech is through mentorship programs and having opportunities for exchanging ideas. So 2 months ago, our team participated in Girls in ICT Day initiatives with virtual events in Grenada and in Jamaica. By partnering with local nonprofits and regional organizations, we're able to have a direct interaction and exchanges with young women globally. There are so many talented young women with advanced coding skills and interest in robotics. And it's really crucial to maintain opportunities for them to have exposure to different career fields in tech. We've built community through the creation of developer circles all over the world, including in Jamaica and in Haiti. These developer circles are communities of innovators where experienced developers receive free opportunities to strengthen their expertise in Facebook products, take part in online discussions, and attend local meetups. There's also an opportunity to lead the circles, and many women are taking advantage of these opportunities. During COVID-19, many of the events moved virtually online, and we saw a huge presence of virtual hackathons and developer events taking place online, slowly adapting to the new norm. And I will just close out by talking about digital literacy and skills, which are really crucial in empowering women and letting both women and young girls know what exists and how to use the internet. As we adapt to changing times, there really needs to be easily accessible resources online for women and girls to learn from anywhere. We have several digital literacy initiatives, including Get Digital, which is our digital citizenship and well-being program, which serves as a resource for educators, for parents, and for students looking to address digital literacy and help young people learn online safety skills. We also have many training programs, skills building certifications, and job tools. One example is She Means Business, which is a long-term commitment to women's economic empowerment. The program supports women-owned enterprises to enter the digital economy through skills training and business inspiration. And so, it's a strong network of community partners. That program has trained 1 million women across 38 markets, and we continue to seek partnerships in emerging markets. So I'll close out there. I'm happy to talk further about, some of our other training programs and certification programs, if you'd like, during the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Monika. It definitely looks like Facebook is definitely understood the impacts of COVID upon its employees and put some really good measures in place. And it's great to hear about the work you're doing with girls and women in ICT, and particularly to the fact that you're doing some of those initiatives within the Caribbean. So more to come. We'll definitely be reaching out to you for some sort of further partnerships.
I look forward to
that. Great. Daisy, we lost you a little. I was going to start with you first, but I think you have the gist of where I started, which was the pandemic has had a greater impact on job losses for females rather than males. And so I wanted to ask you, can you tell us why we think there's such a gap in the job loss based on gender? And how is the IADB using this information from the results that you got to influence policymakers in the public and private sectors within the Caribbean and Latin America region?
Yes, thank you. I apologize for that but in the new norm, we have these technical hiccups, no? So,
Indeed.
and I also wanted to thank you, Wendy, and all of CANTO for organizing this great panel and allowing me to be here with these wonderful women leaders as well. So I'm very familiar with these statistics at the IDB, looking into the impact that the COVID and the global pandemic has had on women is something of clear strategic direction for us, because we want to make sure that we are influencing. We want to make sure that we are trying to put in the right policies in place so that we, one, try to reverse this trend, and two, put in the right skill sets, the right regulations, and the right incentives for governments and also private sector organizations to help with these numbers and increase the women in the workforce. One thing that was already mentioned, and I think it's in your opening remarks as well as Monika touched base on, is the fact that women still have the greater brunt of the domestic work, right? In a study that we conducted, we noted that about 22 hours to 42 hours are dedicated in domestic and care activities for women alone. And when you have a 45 to 50-hour a week job plus trying to keep yourself on the networks and trying to keep yourself in line with what's happening on with the digital transformation, it's very difficult to kind of pan out this life work balance. So a lot of women are suffering because of that. In addition, we also noticed that women are overrepresented in the service sector, where you have the proximity, where you have to be present. You can't service somebody through your computer. So being present at these types of sectors, the tourism sectors, which also was greatly impacted by pandemic, where women are, servicing there, it's, there's a direct link to that. And then there's a third factor that we've also noticed is that the digital skills gap in technology, right? Which I'm glad that Facebook is pushing that and helping us achieve to reduce that gap. But we still have a great gap in the digital skills, and that we need to kind of focus on how do we raise that bar for the women in terms of not only literacy, but also the application of it, giving those job opportunities and being able to move that needle there. Obviously, we need to focus on, the opening up the child centers, the schools in a safe and sustainable way. That is, I think, paramount. Otherwise, women will continue to have to make these trade-offs and these sacrifices between work and family. Also, the vaccination is another area that we're really focusing on, making sure that the populations are getting vaccinated, and specifically women and children, right? Because, if a mother gets sick, she then can't care for her children, her family, her husband, right? So they also need to be very healthy. So focusing on the health aspect is extremely important to kind of move the needle around this. More specifically, in areas of work that we're trying to focus is for companies. We're trying to create incentives through our projects and operation and our funding. We want to put in the incentives that they're really targeting women and the gender gap. At the IDB, we have engaged in the EDGE certification, which is a certification that looks at our gender policies and making sure that we're reducing this gap. And we're looking to replicate these in our companies and says, if you would like financing, there's some conditions that you will have to meet. Number of women represented in your board, for example, the type of work flexibility, your policies around parental leaves. So we're trying to put that as part of our financial package. Talking about flexible work arrangements, this is something that now I think after a year and a half, almost 18 months into it, we realize that this is the way we really want to work. I mean, giving the flexibility to work from home, attend your family, reduce your commuting time, which is something in my case, which has been a big issue for me, and we have to put these things more into our policies. They just can't be a one-off. We have to start moving the way these human resources policies are implemented, not only in companies but in the government. In the government, it's extremely important because then they also kind of lead, in this direction. And then finally, similar to what Monika mentioned, it's around the digital skills. And this is an area that we're also focusing on, making sure that we're putting in our educational sector and our programs the components to provide the digital technologies, the skills, and the literacy. But also very importantly is the application of this, making sure that we're building the pipeline of the next, women leaders. If they're not into, the new technology awareness of what is the emerging technologies, and then they're going to miss out on that important conversation. They're going to miss out on the next breakthrough. So it's just now we can't just focus on the basics of coding, for example, right? Because a lot of that with new platforms is being taken over. We also need to think about, do they understand the emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, such as blockchain, and the applications of these? So we have to push a little bit more that boundary.
Thank
And
you
so
so
that's
much.
kind of where we're at the IDB on.
Great, and I mean, you've been doing fantastic work for many years, supporting the Caribbean region in particular, and I can definitely say that some of those, the results are definitely helping to drive some policies. At least I know for some of the governments in the Caribbean as well as some of the private sector. Many of the initiatives that you mentioned have been implemented in some of the companies we know across the region, and we look forward to your continued support of the region, particularly for girls and women as we try to move to a more gender balanced industry. Thank you for that. Sonali, we heard earlier from our CEO Inga Smith that she is impressed by the female talent within the Caribbean, and that she's committed to hiring and promoting more women in leadership positions within CNW. It is said that what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed, which is why it's so important for companies to know their data. In CNW, we regularly look at the percentages of males and females in our organization, and we're at a good starting point with almost half and half at below management levels. And then we begin to see a gap. So we are aware that the work needs to be done. Levels below management are 54% male to 46% female. So we're almost 50-50. At the management level, it is 56% males to 43% females. So here we already begin to see a gap. At the senior management level, we're 67% males compared to 33% females. And this is where we see the largest jump in the gap. At the executive level, we have 73% males and 27% females. This data reflects the need to invest in the development and growth opportunities of women in our organization to ensure that there's not such a large gap between the starting point and the higher levels. Sonali, can you share with us some initiatives that CNW is implementing to support the growth of women into leadership within our company?
Thank you, Wendy, and also thank you to CANTO for giving me this opportunity. I think you stole a lot of my thunder. I mean, I think, and Inga really did tee it up properly. It starts with commitment. So it really does start with kind of tone on the top and a commitment to acknowledging that this is where we are. And in a few years' time, this is where we would like to be. And that intention or that commitment creates programs, and then which will drive results. So you shared the stats at CNW, and to on the positive side, I'd like to say that those statistics have improved with that intention. So even though you're seeing, in that range of, 30% to 40% at management and executive levels, if we looked back a couple years, those numbers would have been different. So every year we focus on this area, and every year we've improved. Yeah, at CNW, of course, we have some very prominent female leaders, and we like to think that women lift other women up. And I think that has really driven a tone for us to put in some practices and some programs that will continue to drive positive outcome in the future. So just to speak about a few, we in the past year launched a mentorship program specifically driven and related to targeting high potential women managers and senior professionals who have the potential of elevating to that executive level, pairing them with some of our senior leaders, and not just female senior leaders, but also male senior leaders. Everyone needs mentorship, and there's something to learn from all good leaders. So pairing them up with our leadership team to get more visibility and grow their development plans. We also have modified our succession planning process. Many companies have done succession planning for many, many years, but the intention of improving our representation of female leadership has caused us to not just look at succession generically, but really focus on high potential women, high potential engineers, and high potential managers, calling them out in the evaluation and review process, so that we don't lose them in the mix, and we can really target them for development and potential future growth. And then also we have to adjust our recruitment practices. So you had mentioned earlier in your intro about some of the LATAM countries, and certainly in CNW, in some of our LATAM countries, we have made a goal that when we have a position open, that we ensure that in that final candidate select list, before an offer is made, that we see representation of women. So we may not be able to always offer the position to a female, but we need to really ensure that hiring managers are really expanding their view of potential, and they're looking at potential female hires before we kind of go through that process. So it's all a part of a broader system of really focusing on females to be able to move them up in the organization. And we are starting to see some return on that investment, and I would expect that that this would continue in the future. So, I know we'll talk a little bit later about the marketplace in the future, but I can tell you that, we belong to a great company called Liberty Latin America, where that tone has clearly been set at the top. We have a diversity and inclusion office where we, look at where we stand today, and all of our operating entities have the opportunity to really push the envelope on what they're going to do in this space and in terms of improving female leadership.
Thank you for that, Sonali. We know that this is not a new conversation. We've been talking about having more women in the workplace, which we've definitely seen a great improvement over the years, and having more women in leadership, which there has been some improvement, and we know that within our company there's been great improvement. But as you've said, we do need to see, which is why we're having this conversation today with all of you here at CANTO. I know that we have the benefit of several representatives from government and private sector, and the conversation needs to be continued so that we get to that place where we're having different types of conversations, and not about the vast difference in the percentages at the leadership table. So Daisy, I have another question for you. We heard from your profile that you're only one of 2 women on the executive management team of your department, and you're passionate about narrowing the gender gap within your organization. Tell us some of the initiatives that you are personally undertaking to make this a reality.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Well, in addition to the mentoring and coaching, which we do at the organizational level, I do it both formally and informally. One of the biggest achievements that I've had within the IT department was to start a pilot program about 3 years ago. We partnered with a company called Laboratoria. It was a startup in Peru that provided 6 months of boot camp of coding and professional skills development. It was an initial stage of ramping up. The bank provided technical assistance, and our CIO Nuria said, we should think, how can we partner with them? And so what we did is we created a pilot program where we brought graduates from their program, from their boot camp of coding, to the bank in Washington, D.C., provided that international experience, and gave them functions at entry level, just to see, where their professional skills were, their technical skills, and if they could, really thrive in an international organization. And to our surprise, the women that came through the pilot program did an amazing job. They were able to quickly uptake on their technical skills, integrate well within the project teams they were put within the IT department, and then finally just began to create a network. So when we had our new HR manager stepping on board last year at the IDB, I presented to her and I said, we need to scale this up. I said, we have to start thinking broader and really creating a pipeline of young women in the technology sector. Our department is underrepresented women. And so a year later, I'm very happy that we have launched the Young Women in Tech program that recruits 13 women that have gone through the boot camp, that have experience with Laboratoria. And then we offer them a 1-year contract, either at headquarters and one of the country offices. The program not only focuses on having them participate and contribute to the IT teams, but they are also mentored within the organization through our women's network. And so they have kind of the support that they need to thrive. We are really happy about this because, again, the more women that we place, and Sonali mentioned this, you have to think about recruitment at an early stage, right? And if we have these young women who are starting at entry level, and through mentorship, through coaching, we can start developing a pipeline of leaders. But if we don't have these specific recruitment programs targeting women, it's going to be very difficult because the job market is very competitive in the technology industry. And second, as we've talked here, there are so many barriers for women, particularly if they are caregivers and if they, have families. So we really have to focus on breaking those challenges and providing access. Once they're here, it's really up to them, their performance, and their thrive. It's what's going to push them forward. And we just have to create the right conditions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And it's important. It's important for our young girls and young women to see women in the tech space and see women in leadership. They have something to aspire to. When you're the only in the boardroom or you're the only in the office, it also creates challenges for you. Sometimes it creates, fear about how do you move forward? What do you do? So we need to have more women support around us. And of course, we know that the men do support us, and we thank you for that. But we need to encourage our young girls to study in the field as well as to get into the industry so that we can have more women and seeing that those opportunities are available to them. Thank you so much for that, Daisy. Monika, can you share how the private sector has helped to strengthen women's participation in ICT leadership roles?
Oh, sure. I think, one thing, I was really struck, Wendy, by the way you started the question, this round of questions, which is by saying you really can't manage what you don't know. And I think that's an area where the private sector has played an important role, which is in funding and supporting research to understand what are the barriers that are preventing women's full participation in ICT in the first place, so that we can properly address gaps. For example, the Inclusive Internet Index is a joint project of the Economist Intelligence Unit and Facebook, and it includes gender indicators, and it concludes that there cannot be an inclusive internet unless there is gender equality in using the internet. So indicators include affordability, accessibility, and relevance. Facebook's survey on gender equality at home also generates a global snapshot of women and men's access to resources, their time spent on unpaid care work, and their attitudes about equality to provide reliable, accurate, and timely information to support progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In partnership with the World Bank and OECD, our Future Business Survey surveys millions of small businesses on Facebook biannually, more frequently than most business surveys. And we share our country level data from this survey openly and to help provide policymakers, research institutions, and nonprofits with an up-to-date global view of online small business challenges and expectations. And the survey itself is conducted in over 90 countries in every region of the world. As I mentioned earlier, She Means Business is one of our long-term commitments to women's empowerment. And through this program, we also invest in research in order to create and share evidence around gender-sensitive policies and programs that can help unlock women's entrepreneurial potential. We also launched Project 17 when global connectivity was adopted as a sub-target for the SDGs, and the value of connectivity was matched to all 17 goals. Facebook committed to partnership for the goals, and we continuously work with various stakeholders to address connectivity issues, including gender equality. I think it's also important to speak to DEI efforts. We understand that women are also a part of other underrepresented groups. So it's really crucial we continue to invest in these groups in order for women to lead in an equitable and inclusive environment. This month, we released our 8th annual diversity report, which provides a snapshot of some of our recent goals and milestones for 2021. We were pleased to see that the aggregate representation of women globally, people of color that are underrepresented within the company, and people with disabilities and veterans in the US grew. We slightly outpaced our ambitious growth, and today these groups make up 45.6% of our workforce, up from 45.3% in 2020, largely due to increases in representation of women globally and Black and Hispanic people in technical, non-technical, and in leadership roles. And last year, we also made a commitment to increase the representation of people of color in leadership positions in the US by 30%, including a 30% increase in the representation of Black people in leadership by 2025. And in just 1 year, we've achieved a 38.2% increase in Black leaders. And this is a good start on our 5-year goal to increase people of color by 30%. And this has all been supported by strong recruiting and an increased focus on retaining top talent across the company. And we will continue to work to increase Asian, Hispanic, and Black leadership representation, along with our efforts to increase more women in leadership globally. We've also had our most diverse intern class ever this year, with 44% women globally and 20.4% from underrepresented minority communities in the US, like Black and Hispanic Latinx. These are great milestones, but obviously there's so much more work to be done, and we remain committed to advancing women in tech. But you know, as you started out, Wendy, it starts with really trying to have a good, solid understanding of where the gaps are and what we need to address.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we have to say that at least as we are aware and our companies are doing something about it. It's a slow march, but we will get there slowly but surely. We have to continue the conversations and continue to push our companies to be aware and to make a change, make the difference. So thank you so much for that. That's really impressive work that's being done at Facebook. Before I ask the final question to Sonali, I want to remind you guys that you can post your questions in the Q&A section. And after this question, we will open up. Sonali, as we look toward the future and work to encourage more females to follow ICT career path, what are some of the initiatives that companies in the region can undertake to encourage the study of STEM and to attract more women into the industry?
Yeah, and this is really the million-dollar question when it comes to talking about women in tech in general. And this has been a great panel experience. I've gotten so many good ideas from Monika and from Desi. I'll be connecting with them to get a little more creative ideas, because there's no shortage of investment in this space. I mean, I'll speak for cable and wireless for sure. We have some good representation of women in leadership, and when we start to really dissect those stats, you do start to see where from a department perspective, where we have more underrepresentation is actually in kind of our core technology area. We have a lot of senior sales leaders and commercial leaders and customer experience leaders, and of course, in the fields of legal and human resources and even in finance. It's this one area where it seems to be more of a challenge. And then you start to have to evaluate the feeder pool of those roles. And then that's what starts to take you to STEM and start to look at the universities and how many women are actually entering those classes. So we are an active participant of Girls in ICT Day. We do bring these young leaders into our work environment to give them exposure to what we do and how we connect with the community and how we really enrich the lives of the markets that we operate in. Of course, we're limited, like every other good business is, to the number of girls that we have in those classes. And I can tell you that as an employer, we're competing with other employers who all want to do the same thing, which is bring these young people into their workforce and hopefully retain them and grow them in their businesses. So you've got a lot of competition for a fairly small slice of that pie. So it really is what you just said. It will start in the home. It will start with families pursuing their daughters and their nieces and their granddaughters and all to pursue a field in STEM or pursue engineering over other good fields, and so I think we have an opportunity. I can't say that we've cracked this, but we have an opportunity to partner more aggressively and in a structured way with our upper schools and our university institutions to introduce ourselves to them and introduce what a career in telecoms and technology can be for their current class as well as future classes to come, and continue that dialogue of increasing representation of girls going into engineering. And maybe we can do that with mentorship support. Maybe we can do that with financial support. Of course, we bring them in, but again, when I start to think about years down the line, how do we keep that pipeline going and growing, quite frankly? I think that there is a great opportunity to expand our involvement as well, and look forward to being a part of that process.
Great, thank you, Sonali. So we can all agree that while the work is being done, there is still a whole lot that needs to be done. And I want to thank CANTO for giving us the center stage to bring this topic to bear. I think it's the first time in the Women in ICT Committee's history that we've actually been on main stage. We've usually had forums, simultaneously with other ones. So I'm happy to see that the importance of the topic has been understood and that we can take this forward. And we'll now open up for questions. We do have a question, and I'll throw this out for anyone who wants to answer. All comments are quite positive. However, I've experienced women who seem to be unable to co-lead with men. It's frustrating as gender sensitivity is prominent in our core values. As a leader in the digital space, what would you advise given the importance of transformation? But before I open this up, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by unable to co-lead with men. So I'm wondering, is it lead alongside men? Does anyone want to take this question? I know unable to co-lead with men, if the person who asked the question wants to put another comment in the chat, or does any one of our panelists want to address the question?
Maybe I can. I can try because I lead alongside many men in my organization, and the one advice I would tell you is don't try to be a guy. Women and men have different behaviors, different characteristics, different ways to approach because we're different, and that is the value of diversity, and that's exactly what we need to embrace. So instead of trying to focus on mimicking behaviors of men, strengthen on what you believe are your core values, right? And another advice I would say is never say I'm sorry. If you have a point and you believe it in your point, you don't need to be apologetic. Everybody has different viewpoints, and also push for what you really truly believe. And sometimes it's difficult because you might feel overpowered, and you have conversations around will they accept my ideas? But that comes from your confidence within. So one, don't be like a guy, be a girl, and be you. And second, not apologize. Women have great ideas because they think differently, right? And so being able to position them adds a lot of value and creates that diversity that we're really looking towards.
Thank you for that, Daisy. And a recent Forbes study also stated that when women are in leadership roles, those companies that have more women in the boardroom tend to do better, generate a little better revenue than companies that tend to have more men in leadership positions. So let's remember that from the private sector. The next question, understandably, to address the gender balance, a lot of focus is at the organization level. How can the private sector support, collaborate with government to move economy-wide policy in this direction? Great question.
I'm happy to start out taking a stab at that. I think it's important for companies like Facebook and others to share what they're doing, shared policy changes that they've made, and, share what's worked and what hasn't worked, and share, just reactions to those policies and impact of those policies publicly or with government and I think it's important for government organizations to take an interest in this and try to collect what they might see as best practices and try to put that together for the benefit of of the broader society. And I know Facebook put a lot of thought and effort and time and research into shifting policies in light of the pandemic. And my understanding is many of these shifts are going to stay even, once we open up. And I think, we can learn from other companies as well. And I think, government should also embody some of these policies as well. I know Daisy mentioned a lot of things that her organization is doing. But I think being a role model and being a leader is a great platform for government to take.
And Wendy, if I could just add, I don't claim to be, an expert in the region by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been incredibly impressed with how many amazing female government officials I have come to see on stage and hear from in different talks, and frankly, so much more advanced than the United States is in terms of women in government in very, very senior positions, prime minister positions, prime minister +1 positions. So I really think there's a huge opportunity for private sector to partner, but also really would want to even kind of challenge the governments to take a leadership role and challenge private sector even a little bit more on an advancement of policy in this space. I mean, I feel like they've got as much potential to be drivers and us followers than vice versa, or even collaborate, because there is just so much potential there with women representation. I mean, perhaps it's not the numbers and the stats that you were mentioning earlier, but certainly some great entry points. So we have to make sure we capitalize on that. So any opportunity that we can partner with government in any market, I think, can be a great opportunity.
So no, I totally agree. And, I think you reminded me that we use public-private partnerships frequently to work with various stakeholders, not only government ministries, civil society, academia, regulators, mobile operators. I think it's really, these types of partnerships are really impactful. For example, we're partnering with UNICEF around health messaging, which aims to provide, and this partnership aims to provide access to information and resources to millions of women globally. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for partnership where we can learn from each other and also combine forces to, provide information and take on other initiatives for the betterment of society more generally.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you guys so much for that. Very, very inspiring and very thoughtful responses. Again, I have to reiterate, a lot of work to be done, but this is a good start to the conversation. I want to thank you, Daisy, Monika, and Sonali, for candidly sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and your insights. And we look forward to having more discussions with you in this forum and others, because as Sonali said, we will be coming to you guys for some of your ideas and actually to talk to about how we can partner, how we can bring more of these conversations to CANTO and beyond.
Thank you.
Good. In closing, it's important for us to gather data for the Caribbean region to ascertain the number of women in the ICT industry and in leadership positions. To achieve gender balance in the workplace as well as in leadership positions, it takes the commitments of our governments, private sector, international organizations, and our current leaders to commit to driving change by implementing policies to attract and retain women as we move to a more gender balanced industry. So here I wish to make an appeal to the CANTO membership. In March of this year, the Women in ICT Committee sent out an inaugural survey to the membership. Through this survey, we hope to, for the first time, establish a baseline of women in ICT within CANTO's membership and ICT ministries. The intention is to use this data gathered to track the number of women in ICT within our membership and to influence public and private sector policies, as well as create outreach initiatives to support women in the space. Unfortunately, we did not have a good response to the survey, so we'll be sending it out for a third time. So please take a moment to respond. If you're not the person to fill it out in your organization, please pass it on to your HR or people department, but please help us get some responses so that, next time we have this conversation, we can have some rich data and we can show some progress as well. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for your time and attention this morning, and I wish you all an enjoyable experience at this year's conference. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you as well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much, Wendy, for guiding us through this segment, the Women of ICT. Thanks again. This